Good afternoon, everyone. This lecture is on the information literacy that would be found in sources pertaining to a specialized course in American history or a lecture thereof. I have chosen to conduct this discussion based on the Boston Massacre, which occurred March 5th, 1770. This is a pivotal event in American history and as such deserves more attention, especially pertaining to primary documentation. In the database America's Historical Imprints, there are two essential documents that I would like to focus on. One is a poem entitled "On the Death of 5 Young Men Who Was Murdered March 5th, 1770, and was published on a broadside. The other was published in the Boston Gazette, entitled "An Account of a Late Military Massacre at Boston, or the Consequences of Quartering Troops in a Populous Town." Now, the reason why I included the poem is not just for pedagogical usage or even information literacy. It is to emphasize the point that the massacre which occurred had a very profound influence on the mindset of colonial Americans. It is one of the reasons why Americans were so eager to separate themselves from Britain. The Boston Massacre was one of the causes of the revolution, and in fact, Crispus Attucks, a mulatto man, was and still is considered one of the first casualties of the war. The language in this poem emphasizes the contemporary American mindset, and is thus as useful pedagogically as it literally puts you in the mind of those people at that time. However, in terms of information literacy, because it is from a single point of view, it emphasizes emotion rather than fact, it should be a little less relied upon than, say, a newspaper article. Now, the newspaper article, "An Account of a Late Military Massacre at Boston, or the Consequences of Quartering Troops in a Populous Town," is far more useful in that it has more factual information. It contains the names of the men who died and the background as the Americans saw it to the encounter. It even provides a estimate of how many guns were firing. In this article, it was 8 to 11. This is not something you would find in the poem, and as such, is far more useful in information literacy. It also contains hints at why the massacre even began, in its very title, "Quartering Troops." The Quartering Act of the British was essentially where the American colonists had to house and feed these soldiers without reimbursement. Their privacy was not protected, and these soldiers would frequently abuse colonials. Even in the job market, as demonstrated in this book, Death or Liberty by Douglas Edgerton, the British regiments, including the 29th Regiment, would frequently take odd jobs to supplement their income, including at port cities, which Boston was. This, of course, put a strain on colonial economies, which were already strained by things like the Stamp Act. So essentially, the Boston Massacre was an accumulation of events and the emotions tied with those events. It was deadly, and it is seen as the first shots fired, so to speak. I have included the links and images in the abstract found on this discussion post. But what I would like to emphasize here is the differences in how one would use primary sources, the different types of primary sources. Poems and other such literatures are very biased towards the emotions of the people who publish them, or even a group of people. And newspaper articles, while they can be very biased, they are less so than literatures, because they do have facts. They have accounts of events and even names of those involved. But both sources are useful paleologically if examining the emotions of the American colonist and the build-up to the American Revolution. That is all for this lecture. Have a nice day.